Hello, welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Erik Fisher. This week, I'm excited to bring my friend I've known for, 10 years now. It's Ian Anderson Gray. I knew I had to have him on because he's the host of the brand new podcast. He's been doing it for a little while, though. It's the Smart ADHD podcast. He also does the Confident Live Marketing podcast. He's been trained as a professional classical singer, but he also helps entrepreneurs and creatives communicate their voice more effectively through video, podcasting, on stage, virtual event production, but he also specializes in advising on tech and gear and processes and productivity to enhance your performance. Recently, he was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 46, a couple of years ago now, and Ian has been on a journey to find smart tools and strategies to manage his ADHD. So I knew I had to have him on to talk about that. We're going to talk about his journey a little bit, some of the stigma around ADHD. We're going to talk about what the concept of smart ADHD means, as well as addressing some of the myths about ADHD, talking about ADHD and anxiety and emotional and mental health, as well as how you can be productive when you have ADHD. So even if you aren't someone with ADHD, you probably know someone who is or has been diagnosed, and this conversation is going to help you a whole lot like it did for me. Well, this week, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Ian Anderson Gray. Ian, welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
Thanks, Erik. I'm honored to be here.
Man, we've known each other for probably since 2014, 15, almost 10 years, if not 10 years. And for a long time, I thought, Ian would be great to have on the show, but you're so much into video content and being great on video and all that kind of stuff. It fits, and we probably could have shoehorned it in and made it work in a presentational type of focus. But when you started talking about your ADHD journey, then starting an ADHD podcast, I knew at some point you would be on here. So let's start there. We've got so much to cover. You were diagnosed at 46.
I think, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I'm 46 right now. So I don't know if you're now older than that, but we're about the same age. And I was diagnosed years ago and have kind of fallen off the wagon in terms of my journey was all about taking what I could tools wise, but never any medication wise, but that's mine. Yours. What's your journey look like? What were the symptoms, the climate, your state of mind? What was the catalyst that made you think, hey, I should probably get diagnosed? And let's start there.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. So it was back in 2021. So I'm a few years older than you.
Okay. So you're near 50 at this point.
Oh, don't say that.
Sorry.
Stop it now. But yes, that's true. It's weird. I knew people with ADHD and I was quite disparaging about them. This was years ago, 10, 15 years ago. I thought, they're just lazy. They're just all of these things. And then, of course, what's so funny is those kind of things came back to haunt me later on, because those are the kind of things that I was saying to myself. So I've struggled right from since the teenage years, I think, with chronic procrastination. That was one of the things. Negative self-talk, so always thinking that I'm no good at things, that I'm lazy, and a little bit of lacking in impulse control. But the other thing that because I think everyone who has ADHD also tends to have other things as well. And so the kind of ADHD has a little friend in my brain, and that's anxiety. So they kind of counteract each other. So sometimes with the impulse control, so with impulsivity, I don't so much have a problem with that because I have the anxiety side of things. So I was thinking about this for years, and I didn't really know much about ADHD because I assumed, like a lot of people did back then, that ADHD is all about hyperactivity, physical hyperactivity. And although I was, as a kid, age 7 or 8, I was very hyperactive. You'd kind of not think about that now, but I realized actually I'm very hyperactive in my brain. And I thought that is why I need to have afternoon naps all the time, because my brain is I need to press the reset button. So it wasn't really until I started to look at what ADHD actually is. There's a Canadian comedian called Rick Green, and I watched a lot of his videos. We did this documentary called ADD and Loving It. And that really inspired me. I started to think, oh, wow, like all of these things that I struggle with, the chronic procrastination, the emotional dysregulation, the fact that I can be super organized and I can go down the rabbit hole and I can hyper focus like mad, but the next minute I can't. For example, in my blogging, like I used to be a really, I was going to say a prolific blogger, but I wasn't, because I was creating these mega detailed blog posts. But that was because I was going down the hyper focus route. But they were happening maybe 2 or 3 times a year because I had to wait until I was in the zone to be able to do that. And like, boy, did I go into the zone. They helped me in my business. Like, they were absolutely at the center of everything I did. But I got so frustrated with myself because I had to wait. It felt like this. I had to wait until I was in the zone. And so being diagnosed. So a lot of people have said to me, what's the point of getting diagnosed? I kind of know I have. But for me, it took away so much guilt. It gave me a vocabulary for some of the things that I've struggled with. And then the third thing, it's allowed me to build strategies to help with the ADHD. And today, I still struggle with a lot of those things, but at least now I know what it is. And I have got some tools and strategies to help with that. And it's a journey, it's going to continue to be a journey as I go through life.
It's like getting that confirmation. It's not just in my head. I mean, it is in your head, but not in your head in the, you made it up kind of a way. And it's a confirmation. It gives you kind of a grasp, an ability to start having a handle on it. And so obviously that was 2021. I've been privy to some of your journey as you shared it in smaller groups and things like that. When I've been around, you've shared your experience with that and how getting diagnosed and even, I believe, how that's affected your family and your interactions with them, as well as, I believe, some of them having some of the issues as well. Was that right?
Yeah. I mean, part of the other reason why I went down this investigative journey was because I saw some of it in my son. Like, he was exhibiting similar things, like tell him to do something and he just like would find it really difficult, procrastination, going into these hyper focus loops. One thing, you tell him to stop doing something and he's so focused that he won't even listen to you. And even things like noise sensitivity. So if you're in a very, very noisy environment, finding it difficult because you're just too stimulated to hear any conversation. So that was one thing. And then we've also realized that it's probably all of us, like my wife, my daughter, it just exhibits itself in different ways, particularly with women. I think women tend to be, this is a huge generalization, by the way, but women tend to be much better at masking it. I think us men, we're just not good at that. It all comes out. And then I think intelligence plays a role as well, which is interesting because I find this a difficult conversation to talk about. But I think when you are intelligent, you are better at masking it. And so I think particularly if you're a woman and you're intelligent, it's even more difficult to get diagnosed. People will just say, well, you're obviously intelligent, you're successful, you've been able to get through life fine, so you don't have ADHD. So I think we've realized since that actually, yes, we all have ADHD and it's just finding strategies on how to help. And so we've been working with an ADHD family coach, and that's really helped us, giving us a vocabulary of how to talk about things, the struggles that we have, particularly when it comes to emotional dysregulation. Because, if one of us has a meltdown, we know what to do in those situations.
That's helpful. Yeah. To have kind of that, not just for your own sake, but to de-escalate it from their side of things in case it's you that's having the issue. It helps to have that language. So you've made changes. Obviously you've been toying with things. We're going to get into different concepts, things you've come up with, different struggles, even ways that you've worked with the anxiety and the emotional and mental health side of it. But when it comes to the podcast, obviously you're calling it Smart ADHD. What does that concept mean? And what made you think, you know what, I have permission to start a show about this?
Yeah, I was quite reluctant about launching it because, first of all, like I'm having to admit to the world that I have ADHD. And I've also had people who've said to me that, Ian, like, don't let your ADHD define you. People can also be quite disparaging. For example, like somebody said to me, like, who's going to hire you if they think you have ADHD because you're going to forget, if you're forgetful and all that kind of stuff. But that, in a way, once I thought about that, that made me want to do it more because there are so many myths, there's so many stigmas. And I think, yes, there are plenty of ADHD podcasts out there, but I think I have a unique experience and a unique voice when it comes to this. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it. But also I've got my coach to blame for this as well. So she's quite well known in the ADHD world. She's called Dr. Tamara Razia, and she's written a few books on this. For example, Your Brain's Not Broken. And there's another one coming out very soon, which is, I think it's something like You, Me, and My ADHD Family. I might have that wrong, but it's along those lines. And she was said to me, yeah, you need to do this. You need to do a podcast, because she knew that I was quite good at video and podcasting. So do you see what I did there? I'm quite good. I'm being typical ADHD.
Humble,
I'm being
too.
British, humble. And I kind of, the ADHD part of me likes to kind of put myself down. Anyway, the particular angle, the SMART angle, is, first of all, it's smart strategies to how to help with your ADHD. So that's really part of it. But the other thing is, it's specifically for smart individuals, even if you don't think you're smart. And for years, I didn't think I was smart. I thought I was okay. But I think those of us with ADHD, we tend to have a very warped view of ourselves, of our skills, our skill set. And so I think those who are smart and have ADHD have quite a hard time of it, because we tend to overthink. We tend to make it much more difficult for ourselves. And so that's kind of the angle with the podcast. And thankfully, Tamara has come onto the show a few times to talk about this, particularly, I think in the US particularly, you call this 2E, twice exceptional. So it's ADHD and something else. And that could be high intelligence at the same time. So we focus a lot on that on the show. The other thing is, I'm not an expert. And I always say this at the beginning of every episode. I'm no ADHD expert, but I'm talking about my story, my experiences, and I interview experts on the show. So it's kind of partly sharing my journey and what I'm learning along the way and putting my perspective on things.
Well, and I want to get into that, your perspective, your tips, tricks, tools, et cetera, that you've worked with, your systems that you've created. Before that, though, obviously, you kind of mentioned this already. It was partly why you were maybe hesitant to even get diagnosed, but also why you were hesitant to go public with a show about it, is the myths, the stigma. What are some of those myths that you've found, and what is some of that stigma that you've encountered, whether it was internal and just in your head, like we said earlier, or like what was your perceived stigma at least?
Yeah. And part of that comes from the fact that I had those stigmas myself. As I mentioned, I have a singing background. I trained as a professional classical singer, typical ADHD. Like I've done so many different things in my life, and I taught singing, and there was one student of mine who had ADHD, and I was quite dismissive. Not to him, but in my mind I was. And that's one of the things that one of the myths is that ADHD is all to do with just naughty schoolboys. So you're kind of like just hyperactive all the time. And it can be physical hyperactivity, but it can often be mental hyperactivity. I think the other issue is in the name. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It used to be known as ADD, and it's kind of had a rebrand. And I'm not sure the rebrand is great.
I'm not sure either. I'm not sure if I agree with it either. But earlier, when you said the thing about hyperactivity and having that not be a physical thing, but a brain thing.
Yes.
When you said that, I was like, oh, he gets it. Because that's what I've been thinking of it as too. It's your brain is a muscle. Your brain's the hidden muscle that's doing the activity.
So again, I'm no expert on this, but from what I've read and what I've studied on this is that if you have ADHD as an adult, you will have had ADHD as a kid. And I was quite hyperactive physically as a child. Like my mum would, like, she would almost like not take me to like friends' houses because I would like just go run around and almost knock things down. But I think what then tends to happen as you get older, that then becomes internal. And I think it was so deep in my psyche that I wasn't even aware of that inner dialogue that was happening. So when the diagnosis came back for me as combined type. There are different types of diagnosis. There's combined type, there's predominantly hyperactive type, and then predominantly inattentive type. And I thought I was inattentive, but it came back as combined because I am. My brain is wired all the time, and that's why I get tired very easily, because I'm always thinking, and it's not always a good thing. Sometimes it's negative loops. Yes, so the hyperactivity is one of those myths. The other one that I hear a lot, and this actually, when I first got diagnosed, I found it really difficult, is everyone's like that kind of attitude. And so when I said to somebody, a friend of mine, yeah, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD, and they said, oh, really? What's that? And I said, well, for example, I struggle with procrastination, and sometimes I go into a hyperactive loop, hyper-focus loop, sorry. And I went through all of these different things. And they said to me, well, yeah, everyone struggles with those things. Everyone's a little bit forgetful. Everyone struggles with that kind of stuff. And I found those kind of replies really hard, because that's what I say in my head. I start to kind of think, well, you're a bit of a fraud. This is just an excuse for you, Ian, it's the ADHD thing. But I think the truth of the matter is that it's not that people without ADHD don't do these things. It's that it's chronic. It happens all the time. So like, I don't just lose my keys, once a week. I lose my keys every day. That's why I have an AirTag on my keys. And it's the same with procrastination. Like, it's not just every now and again. I procrastinate all the time. And it is to such a degree that it is often debilitating. Somebody said, I think again, it was Rick Green. It's like saying everyone has height. Of course, but some people are tall and some people are short. It depends. It's a scale, isn't it? So I think it's just not a helpful thing to talk about. It's a scale. It's a spectrum, isn't it? So those are just some things. There's plenty of other stigmas out there which I'm sure we could talk about, but those are the main ones that come to mind.
Well, and then working in the online world, obviously Smart ADHD is in the show. It's aimed at creatives. It's aimed at entrepreneurs. I don't know if you outright say that or not, but I think it feels like it is.
I do.
Yeah. So how do you think that plays into it in terms of, ADHD influencing your creativity, your entrepreneurial pursuits? Obviously it's been, I know this backstory from you. I'm trying to see if you can kind of convey, like, to somebody that's listening in on this, like, this is maybe what's been blocking you in a lot of ways, or stifling you, or you're trying to figure out the right productivity tools when maybe that's not exactly the issue.
Yeah. So like I always I enjoy going down rabbit holes of tools and trying to find the right thing. But actually, I almost enjoy the process, and that more than actually, I was trying to find a tool to help me with my productivity, and I've actually spent the last 5 hours trying to kind of hack Todoist to do what I want. And I've, it's that kind of thing. Yeah, I think those of us who are creative people, we tend to have very divergent thinking. And that is a very ADHD-like thing. I'm not saying that all creative people are ADHD, but let's put it this way. A lot of ADHD people are creatives. And there are a lot of people with ADHD, I think, in our space. It's also important to say there are as many types of ADHD as there are people with ADHD. It will manifest itself in a different way. Like, your ADHD will be different to my ADHD, and we will have to find different ways to tackle what we are struggling with. So there are negatives, there are absolute negatives, and we've talked about a lot of those negatives, but there are positives as well. I wouldn't go as far to say that ADHD is my superpower, because I think that kind of almost belittles the struggles that I have. But on the other hand, there are some real benefits. There is that creativity. There is that out of the box thinking. The problem is I sometimes need to rein those things in, because I will be all over the place. Or, as I said before with the blog posts, like when I was in the zone, wow, amazing blog posts that would do really well. But that was maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So it's a case of realizing those things. And then I think the other thing, a lot of people that I've spoken to struggle with things like imposter syndrome or that negative self-talk. And again, that is not just for ADHD people. There are plenty of neurotypical people that will struggle with that, but it's particularly exacerbated if you have ADHD. It can be debilitating. And there's been times when I was speaking at Social Media Marketing World, this big conference in San Diego, and I had like imposter syndrome when I was there. So this is going to sound ridiculous, but like there were other people out there who were rushing around trying to get people to come to their talk. I was almost doing the opposite. Like I didn't want anyone to come to my talk, except I did. So when it actually came to when I was on stage, I actually wanted more people to be there, but I was beforehand, I kind of was self-sabotaging myself. I tell you what, Eric, it's exhausting stuff. Like, what's going on in our heads. It's just nuts. So coming up with, well, first of all, that realization and that understanding is absolutely key, but then coming up with strategies that will help, and also getting help from professionals out there, where it's coaches or whatever, that's been absolutely vital for me.
Before we get into tools, you've mentioned that before. I want to talk about the ADHD and anxiety relationship, that and like the emotional and mental health aspect of this. Because, when you're hyperactive, like you said, taking a nap every day is almost basically a must. For me, it almost is too. Maybe not every day, but I can tell the days that I don't. And I thought, man, what is wrong with me that I need this, that I can't function without this? Because you're burning out. You're basically burning out in a different way than other people. But let's talk about a little bit about that relationship between ADHD and anxiety, as well as the emotional and mental health aspect.
So again, like I will say, I'm not an expert on this, but from what I know, ADHD people tend to not have so much reliable connection with our prefrontal cortex, which is where all the it's kind of like our butler. The prefrontal cortex is our butler. So like if you don't have ADHD, you'll say, okay, butler, where are my keys? And it will say, oh, well, the keys are in the hallway where you left them earlier today. And if you have ADHD, that doesn't happen. It's like, you've forgotten your keys. You've lost them again, you idiots. It's that kind of thing. And that's the anxiety talking to you because you're frustrated with yourself. But because we don't have so much of that access to the prefrontal cortex, we use our limbic system. And our limbic system is really that emotional center. So that's why people with ADHD, such as myself, we tend to have very big emotions. So either everything's amazing or the world's going to end. And it's like, I feel awful. Like, earlier today, I can't remember what happened, but something like not that bad happened. I think the weather, it started raining and it was a gray sky. And I just got really annoyed with it. I thought, so we tend to feel emotions very deeply. And an analogy that Tamara Razia came up with, which has been really helpful for me, is to talk about your emotions as like a swimming pool that we carry around with us. And the swimming pool is just our emotional center. With people without ADHD, they have a barrier around the swimming pool. But if you have ADHD, there is no barrier. So it's very easy to fall into your swimming pool. And the swimming pool, the emotions can be happy. So like if something really exciting's happened, maybe you're going in a roller coaster and you love roller coasters, you get really excited and you're splashing about in the pool in a positive way. But equally, you could get really angry and frustrated and you're splashing around in that pool. Or you might be really sad and you might just go down to the bottom of the pool and just wallow there. The key is to understand if you're getting close to that pool and if you can, to put measures in place so that you don't fall into that pool and that you don't splash other people. And this is what's been particularly important in our family. If I get in my pool, if I'm really frustrated, I will lash out at other people. And what they've learned to do is the only person that can get me out of my pool is me. And that's actually quite hard because what tends to happen is like my wife will want to try and get me out of my emotional pool. And what happens is I pull her in with me and she's going, like that. So that's been really helpful. And then the other analogy that's been really helpful is to personify your anxiety. So this is giving this person a name and a character so that you have a better idea of what's actually happening. And so to give you an example, my anxiety is an old librarian called Lawrence. I don't know if you've ever watched the BBC drama Merlin, but there's an old librarian in that. Or think of like Harry Potter. It's a bit like that. And he's got my best of intentions, but he's always there to tell me what could go wrong and that I need to get everything sorted. So if I'm going to the airport, I need to arrive there 4 hours early, probably. I need to overcompensate because I need to make sure I need to double check everything because everything could go wrong. If I'm speaking on stage, he reminds me about actually how bad I am because he wants to protect me from the stress of the situation and actually just to go home, go to bed, because that'd be a lot easier. So actually understanding that, and I can then come back to him and say, look, Lawrence, it's okay. I've spoken at a conference before. I've done this before. It's going to be okay. And that has really changed things for me. It doesn't take away the anxiety, but it allows me to at least be able to do something about it, to be aware of it, to be aware of that dialogue, and then to be able to say, look, it's okay, to speak some truth into the situation. So it does sound a bit weird. It sounds like I'm speaking to this person in my head, but it really does help. And then there is another part to the brain which takes what Lawrence is saying and then amplifies it out. And again, I think that's the limbic system, and it goes in a big megaphone and amplifies that message, particularly in those stressful situations.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the internal dialogue that's happening. Let's talk a little bit about the external space that you're in. When it comes to, I don't know about you, but when it comes to me, I sometimes find I need, because like right now we're literally recording and I have a great microphone here, so I'm not picking up what's happening in the rest of the house. And you probably can't hear it either, and neither can the listeners, but I can, and it's slightly distracting. And so there's my confession that sometimes those external things come in and I need I need noise canceling headphones. Luckily AirPods exist and my big over the ear Sony ones exist and I can use those. However, sometimes I also find that going to a public place and having a switch up of environment and soundscape helps me. But what's your experience been like that?
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point that you made. Like that would really, I think my anxiety levels would be going up if I could hear other stuff happening in the house. I've told my son has his cousin over and I've said, you need to be quiet. They're watching a Marvel movie. Put the volume down. Because if I could hear that, I think my emotions would start to go, ah. And so I think atmosphere and the environment that we're in is so important. Like I've made my studio space here as conducive as I possibly can to creating content and to working. But I still get cabin fever sometimes. I need to get out of the house. But things like noise cancelling headphones are so important to me. And I use some apps on my phone to kind of block out the sound or play out different types of music. I've even got some loop earplugs as well, which I'm experimenting with. They have pros and cons, but particularly in noisy environments where I don't want to completely cut myself off, I've kind of come up with different ways. But I think going for walks, just changing that. If I was in the same environment all the time, I think I would go mad and I would lose my productivity and I would get depressed, I think.
I know you've done some different types of noise testing, like white noise, pink noise, brown noise, to aid focus. I know you've already used one of my favorite tools, Brain FM. What has your workflow or your testing of those yielded for you?
Probably the best purchase ever were these headphones that I'm wearing. Actually, they've been superseded by my Apple AirPods Pro 2 because they are they're small and you can walk around. The noise cancelling is amazing. I can just get rid of all of those things. I also find built into iPhones is the background noises. So you don't even need an app. You can actually just switch. I just go into control panel, click the background noise option, and there's an option for balanced noise, which is kind of like a mixture of white and brown noise. That is amazing. I love that. So in terms of the noises, you can have white noise, which is full spectrum, and that blocks out all the kind of background noises. For example, if you're in a coffee shop, it will do its best to kind of cut out all of those sounds. However, I find personally white noise too harsh and abrasive. And there's pink noise, but that's even more abrasive, I think. So I like brown noise, which is slightly deeper, more resonant sound. That's what I found works really well. I love Brain FM. Again, that's probably one of the tools I use all the time. Like if I'm having an afternoon nap, I will go into one of the sleep sounds, and it just I'm asleep in about a minute with that. For afternoon naps, if I'm feeling a little bit stressed, I will put the de-stress music on there. And I should probably put air quotes when I say music. This is as a musician myself, I find listening to music distracts me because I start to analyze the music. It's not that type of music. It's stuff to help you focus or go to sleep or de-stress you. And that's the final thing is the focus music, because that allows me to really focus on the work. And I don't know what it does, but it's something about the music really helps me focus on what I do. And it's similar to I suppose it's similar to what maybe stimulant medication does or fiddle toys do. So we quite like fiddle toys, like these little snake puzzles. If I'm in a Zoom meeting, I'm probably playing with one of those. It helps you focus because your part of your brain is stimulated with something else, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And so secret here for me, I do enjoy listening to podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. People would be surprised that some of my favorite ones are celebrities talking to celebrities, whatever, and movie review type things. I listen to a lot of those. I find some of those that are kind of innocuous. Like it doesn't matter if I miss some of it and I put a sleep timer on and then my brain is focused. It's almost like my version of brown noise in a way for when I need to like sleep sometimes. And honestly, I used to listen to music, like real music, not this Brain FM soundscape music when I would try to go to sleep. I mean, I'm a huge music fan. I would hear things that I'd never heard before because I'm listening to it in an isolated area. Honestly, people that aren't like true music lovers, we don't do this anymore. Music is a background thing. We sit down and we air quotes, consume visual art in terms of TV and movies and things like that. But we don't just sit with our music and pour over the liner notes in the album or the CD as much anymore. So that all changed. But point being, yeah, podcasts can actually be, and there are podcasts out there that it's like LeVar Burton reads you a story, which is great. But I found, no, I want to pay attention to the story. So what's one that doesn't really matter? What's fluffy? If I miss some of it and I just scroll back later after I realize, I put a sleep timer on so it doesn't get too far in. Some of those celebrities talking to celebrities, have some pretty interesting, fun stuff. So there's my tip.
I assume but what are you doing when you're listening to those type of podcasts? Are you relaxing? Are you doing some work? I think that it kind of depends on the type of activity you're engaged in when you're doing those things.
True. There are some times where there's probably different levels that I haven't clearly defined, but I guess I could kind of define it right now in 2 seconds, which is, okay, these are ones that I would like just kind of passively listen to while I'm trying to fall asleep. Don't matter. Here's ones where like I want to pay attention a little more. And so I will do a chore or mow the lawn or do dishes or laundry, things like that with that. And then there's the ones that I hope people like listening to this show for, where they pay full attention to it and they're taking notes and things like that. I have some of those, but that's, again, those are more intentional listening focus.
But I find like when I'm actually really wanting to focus on a podcast, for example, if I'm just sitting in a chair, I will lose my focus, even if it's like really, really amazing. I find that if I'm walking or if I have a fiddle toy or something, or if I'm driving, that's great. That helps me focus more. It's kind of weird with ADHD. You'd think these things would distract you, but they actually help you focus more. It's kind of like a lens for glasses, so you can actually focus more on the activity that you're engaged in.
I am a big podcast listener while driving. I will plug my phone in and CarPlay something every time. It's typically not music, unless there's people in the car, especially family, who are like, come on, I don't want to listen to a podcast. And they'll push music. So that's typically what happens.
Yeah,
but again,
that sounds typical.
That's another facet of living with people and them living with us, I suppose. So we mentioned some tools here. We mentioned Brain FM. We mentioned some of the other white noise, pink noise, brown noise tools. We've talked about physical tools, headphones. There are other tools out there, though. I know that you've done some things exploring like timers with Focus Mate and other things like that. Notion as a second brain tool. Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, one tool that is kind of similar to what we've been talking about, I just want to mention, is the importance of breathing. So I was a little bit apprehensive about this because I thought, like, breathing, what's that going to do? But what I've noticed, particularly if I'm anxious or stressed about a situation, let me get this right. There's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And what tends to happen if you have ADHD is that I think the sympathetic nervous system is that kind of fight or flight system that you kind of go into. And, if, for example, you're going to go and speak at an event, or you're going to get a tiger is running towards you and is about to kill you, or those kind of situations where they're stressful, that the sympathetic nervous system raises your adrenaline levels And that's really important. You need those adrenaline levels to do your best. But what tends to happen is that the sympathetic nervous system, when you have ADHD, kicks in much more readily, and then it's very difficult to switch back out of it. And I've noticed that if I'm anxious or stressed, it might be about very tiny little things. I need to work on relaxing my body, and breathing really helps. So there's an app on my iPhone called I Breathe, and it has this kind of little haptic feedback. It's really cool. So it says breathe in for 7 seconds, hold the breathing, and then breathe out. And if you have ADHD, it actually makes it really fun and interesting, and it really makes a big difference if I do it. So I was very reluctant to try it because it felt a bit silly, but really makes a massive difference. So I highly recommend you could use that tool. It's free, that one, which I like, but there are probably plenty of others. In terms of other tools, so I'm a massive fan of Notion. Once I got over the temptation to overcomplicate it and to make it look beautiful, if you go to YouTube, there are hundreds of videos on how to construct this beautiful Notion workspace, and it's got images and the fonts and all this kind of stuff. I had to get over my want of doing that and realize, actually, this is a tool to help me to be more productive. So I have, for example, a database in there with all my items in my studio. I've got all the cables in there. I may have gone down a hyperfocus rabbit hole when I did this, but I did get some help from a professional organizer. So I've got all my cables. I've got all the stuff that I use in my business is in this database, which means if I'm going away on a trip and I need to get an HDMI to USB-C, I know exactly where it is. It's in box C, and I just go in there. My son was going off to Belgium for a school music trip. I knew where to find the EU power adapters because it was all in my setup there. The other thing that I've found really useful is for notes about what I'm thinking about. And what I do is I think it's Thomas Frank came up with this cool way of speaking into an app on your phone and then ChatGPT transcribing it into text and then actually adding a summary of the note in Notion. This is amazing. So I use this, or I use the voice part of ChatGPT on my phone because I have so many cluttered thoughts. I don't know whether you're like this, Erik.
Oh, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, my brain is I've got all of these ideas. And so I dropped my daughter off she was in this choir rehearsal in Manchester. And on the way back, CarPlay, and by the way, I have you to blame for CarPlay because when we met up in Nashville, you were talking about the wonders of CarPlay. And so when I went to get a new car, I said, the only thing I'm interested in is CarPlay. So I plugged my phone in and I could have a conversation with ChatGPT. So I said to ChatGPT, I'm on my way back home and I've got all these ideas for my business. Can you help me clarify these? And so I just had a chat conversation back and forth, brainstorming all of these ideas that were flowing around in my head. And at the end of it, I had all of this in text format, which I could then paste into Notion. I asked it to summarize it at the end. So using these tools are amazing for those of us who are very much verbal processors, who need to speak things out. And we don't always have friends, or we don't have friends at that moment in time, or friends who can cope with us kind of vomiting all of this kind of stuff in our heads. So AI is amazing from that point of view, and then utilizing apps like Notion to store all of that so you know where it is for next time. And there is another tool that I've not been using it, but I do want to mention it because it is really cool. It's a new tool called Inbox to Notion. So it's Inbox and then the number 2 Notion. And it's a way of connecting your Gmail account with Notion. So you basically just label the emails you're interested in, those actionable emails, I should say, and those emails then get added to Notion. And I've been working on ways to summarize my emails and to give me an action plan of my emails. So that's work in progress. But I'm excited about AI when it comes to ADHD because there are so many things I think that can help us with when it comes to AI, definitely.
I am glad to hear that you have made the CarPlay GPT a thing. I have only done it, I think, twice so far, but when I've done it, and I just thought, this is a fluke. Will it work? Will it even work this way? And I tried it and it worked, and I had a good 20 to 30 minute conversation with a person that was sitting in the passenger seat that didn't exist, is what I kind of was looking at it as. And just knowing that was all getting recorded, like what I was saying, as a prompt, so to speak, and what it was recording and then reporting back to me. And then again, verbal processors like you and I both are, apparently. I don't know that I knew that about you, but I do now. That's the thing, is like, it's one of those things where you need somebody to just bounce things off somebody. And we all have friends, we have colleagues, we have coworkers, etc. But everybody's busy and they have their own stuff they're working on. And so taking a walk and talk, literally, with your phone, helps.
And also, like, you don't like it would be quite like selfish of me just to talk at somebody and then to expect them to decipher what I've said. But this is why apps like ChatGPT are so helpful, because our prefrontal cortex it's like RAM in a computer. You know, it's like we've got like the equivalent of an Apple One in terms of RAM. We just don't, there's not much of it there. We have to kind of put it more into the long-term memory banks. I kind of liken it to our prefrontal cortex is like an Etch-a-Sketch. So we can hold the information, we can draw it there, but then like our little sister's going to come in and shake it all and it's all gone. So having it all in ChatGPT or in Notion, it gets rid of all of that anxiety, because you might forget, but it's going to be in there. And then you have a way of actually organizing those thoughts. It's a game changer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that is great. And again, using it as kind of a sounding board, collecting board, personal assistant, fill in your metaphor here. But it does touch on something that I think is important, and we kind of land on this, is community and accountability. You emphasize the importance of those two things in your show. How have you been incorporating those into your own life on the human side of things? We've already talked on the tech side of things. Maybe there's more tech to help with that too, but...
Oh, there's always more tech. You know, we could probably speak for another hour on that, but actually that does miss probably the most important thing, and that is that human connection. I think one of the things we've probably all realized over the last 4 years is how much we need human interaction. Like I would classify myself as an introvert in the sense that if I'm around people too much, I get drained of energy, and I get my energy from time alone or with small groups of people. But I realized how much I need people, and we need to have a team of people around us. We need cheerleaders to help us, to encourage us. We also get a lot from being other people's cheerleaders and encouraging other people too. So the gift of encouragement is a massive thing, to have people around us who are like-minded, who understand us. So this can be on a friendship level, but also you can have professionals around you. And so I've had people to help who are ADHD experts. So as I mentioned, having an ADHD coach, I've had a business coach, and all of those things really help. So yes, ChatGPT can help with some of maybe the more mundane things, but when it comes to those real deep human things, that connectedness, I think we need people more than ever. And that's why I've decided to start to go to many more conferences, physically meeting people, because it's those bouncing off ideas in the real world, because I think that does make a difference. I mean, like what we're doing now is great, but there's something magical about actually being in the same room and connecting with each other. And I think as human beings, we're kind of wired for that. With ADHD, this time that we're living in is so exciting. We've got so many amazing things. We talked about AI, so much excitement, but it's kind of like a fire hose of stuff that's being fired at us. It's too much stimulation. Whereas like 200 years ago, why do people keep saying that there's so many people have ADHD these days? It's because 200 years ago, there were still loads of people with ADHD. It's just that the world was such a much more of a simple place than it is today. So that's why I think we need people more than ever to help us with those things and to understand us and to bring that joy into our lives again. So yeah, that's why I think human connections are so important.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are going to find out that there's a community to be reached out to locally, not to mention digitally, especially with like your show and things like that. Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned 200 years ago. It's like, yeah, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, the smartphone addiction, that makes everybody has it now, ADHD, because of that. No, that's just, it's the equivalency of everybody eating a high sugar diet, you know, empty calories. So it exacerbates the tendency to be scatterbrained and have symptomatic issues. Then for those of us that do have actually ADHD, it makes it so much worse. So reining in, having boundaries, things like that.
It's like that would make people ADHD-like, but it doesn't give them ADHD. And it is a scale. And I think if you have ADHD, all of these things exacerbate that. So we're even more ADHD than we would have been 200 years ago, without doubt. But there's certain things we can do to make our lives a lot easier if we're willing to do that.
So I want to point people to your show, Smart ADHD. Where can people find that?
So the website is at smartadhd.me, so you can find it there. But it's all in whichever podcasting app that you use, you'll be able to find it. Just search for, because it's quite a new podcast, you're probably best searching for the full name, which is Smart ADHD Podcast, and you'll find it there.
Perfect. Ian, it's been great talking with you. I always talk with you, but it's great to talk with you here on the show. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll definitely have you back on.
Thanks, Eric. It's been great.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Ian as much as I did. I will make sure to link up to his show, Smart ADHD. You can probably look it up where you are listening to this podcast right now if you want to continue along with Ian on his journey. And if you found this conversation helpful, do me and Ian a favor. Hit share wherever you're listening to this, your podcast player app of choice, or if you're over at the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com where I'll list up everything we talked about. I'm betting you know somebody with ADHD that might find some interesting help in this. Or maybe you or somebody you know is on the fence about getting diagnosed. Use this as that catalyst to do so. Just confirm it. Figure out if you are or not, especially if you're not, because if you're not, there's probably something else, get that checked out, get your health in order. Trust me, this episode for me is a turning point for me in terms of I am going to be diving deeper into ways that I can deal with my own ADHD that I've neglected in certain aspects for too long. So all that said, share this episode out. Let someone know that needs to hear it. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next episode.